Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to install a modified turbo front crossmember on a 1994 Mazda MX6. This modified front crossmember is going to replace your front to rear crossmember that goes across the transmission, so you have more room to run turbo hot pipes, up and down pipes, in your engine bay. It attaches there and over there at your front tow hook areas, and it does have a spot for a motor mount so that your engine sits the way it should. Step one is to safely jack up your car and support it with jack stands in proper locations. You cannot jack it up for this project from the front crossmember or from the tow hooks because you're going to need to be accessing those. With the car safely jacked up and supported, you can go ahead and get underneath and take a look at what you're going to be working on. So under the car you're going to have two bolts here, which is right underneath the front motor mount. You're going to have the two bolts for your front motor mount. Then your crossmember is going to come all the way back. You're going to have two bolts you're going to have to undo right in there. And then finally two bolts that will be in there, which is underneath this piece I have painted blue, which you're going to have to take off those three bolts there and those three bolts there. So I'm going to start by removing these three bolts and those three bolts, and I've also added two more jack stands just as precautions. I've left one bolt in on each side just to make sure the crossmember doesn't drop down on my head, but just lift up on the crossmember and undo these bolts and it should pop right off. With the side-to-side crossmember down, you'll be able to see the two bolts that you're going to have to undo in the back on your front-to-rear crossmember. I'd go ahead and undo these bolts first, to the ones that go to the transmission. So jacking up from this little hub on the transmission, lift up on the motor a little bit so that you can take your tension off of the motor mount and the transmission mount, but don't lift it up so much that it takes your pressure off the jack stands, because that's dangerous. The bolts for the side-to-side crossmember were 17 millimeter, as are the motor mount bolts. And so you're going to go ahead and get these off now, but you can't reach them with a wrench, so you're going to have to use a ratchet. Undoing the bolts for this transmission mount, I realized that it's pretty much just broken anyway. Like, that's not even doing anything. It's loose. It's cracked. It's not helping at all. I undid that and went ahead and undid the bolts for the motor mount. Got those loosened. Working on the back ones. So I got both these off. They have little rubber things to absorb vibration, 17 millimeter. Those are for the transmission thing are 14 millimeter. These are both 17s. I'm just working on undoing these two, and I've got a jack stand there because this is surely going to drop once I get that bolt out, and it's decently heavy. Got this down. It slipped right over that jack, which is pretty cool, so it didn't fall all the way. Undid those bolts, gave it a little wiggle, and it just popped right off. This end's only being supported by these shrouds right now, which are held up by zip ties, so I'm going to cut those and I should be able to pull this out. Got it off, and you can see just how much space this has added, all the way from those bolts there to those bolts there. All that is now free, and your turbo pipes can come right across the transmission without being hindered, because your new crossmember is going to come from over here, over that way. The next thing to do is to undo these bolts on the tow hooks. There's going to be three, 1, 2, and a third one up in there that you can't really see, but you should be able to get those with a wrench, and you're going to go ahead and take off your stock tow hooks. There are actually 4 bolts in there. These two are very hard to see because they're up inside that shroud. You're going to have to undo it and reach your hand up in there and undo those, but that's why the brackets for your modified front crossmember look exactly the same as this. And you should be able to put these stock tow hooks back on over top of those once you get this in place. So that's one side done. Go ahead and take off the other. Now that you got both of your factory tow hooks off, you can go ahead and start to install your front crossmember. I'm going to start by lining everything up and putting the bolts in for the motor mount, because that's pretty central. Alright, so I've got the bar in. It was extremely tight on the ends there, but I just managed to, you know, knock around with a hammer. It's important to make sure that the motor mount is lined up. You can take a little bit of stress off the engine by lifting it with a jack, and then you can maneuver your motor mount and then put it back in and then suck that up, and that tends to mostly orient all the holes where they need to be. Right there you can see the end of the thing. It goes right where the other where the stock tow hook mount was, and then you're going to go ahead and put this back over top if you want. Just put it in before you put in those bolts there. Just slip it over and put the bolts through everything. I got this side on with the original bracket in place, and I tell you, that bolt at the top, the fourth bolt, is near impossible to get to. The horn's right there and you have almost no room. It's taken me like over half an hour just to get this side on. It's terrible because you got to get these 3 layers lined up and then you get a bolt through it and get a wrench on it. But the other side should be a ton easier. I always like to do the hardest side first so that I can get the other sides once it's easier, and I don't want to kill myself as much. Now that I got this side on, which was a lot easier, I just went ahead and tightened up all these bolts. Just make them as tight as you can without using excess force, of course. And then I went ahead and I put all these bolts that aren't really needed anymore back in and tightened them down just in case. You know, they don't do anything, but I figured better them sitting there than on the floor of my garage. So my camera died, the battery, so I'm using my phone now, which it says it films in 1080p, but it's probably going to be terrible quality compared to what we were just filming with. Basically, you're just going to attach the side-to-side cross member right there and right there, and then you're pretty much done. After you've got your rear cross member back installed, the side-to-side cross member, you can just see how much free space you've got now for your turbo pipes to come in, joining those 2 headers and going up over there. Overall, this install took probably 2.5 to 3 hours, and I was taking my time with it, so you might be able to get done a little faster than that, hopefully with the help of this video. But definitely worth it. And of course, I, you know, gave some parts some touch-ups. Lots of nice shiny blue paint. Pretty much the only tools you'll need will be the 17mm wrench and a 14mm wrench. It was a pretty straightforward install. Of course, you'll need a hammer. Always need a hammer. Thanks for watching.